Welcome to the last video of this project. And so let's finish this section by learning a little bit about how we can write some documentation for our code in order to make our code easy to understand also for other people. And then at the end of the video, I will again show you some challenges and some improvements that you can implement on this application on your own. So there is a standard way of writing documentation for JavaScript functions, and that is called JSDocs. So let me choose one function here for which I'm going to write some documentation, and that's going to be this render function. So this one. So of course, I'm not going to document now the entire code base, but let me just show you how it works with this function here. And we can also go to jsdoc.app. So that's jsdoc.app. And so here you can find some more information besides what I'm going to show you now. So to write documentation, we basically write a multi-line comment like this, and then a second star. And then you see that automatically a JSDoc comment is initialized here. And so if we hit enter, then you see that already this has pre-filled some code here. You see? So data and render are actually already the parameters that we have here. So VS Code automatically found them, right? But let's start with a quick description of this function. Let's say render the received object to the DOM. Then here the data, we can describe it inside of these curly braces. So we can say that we expect an object here, or we also expect an array of objects. And so that is represented with the OR symbol here, and then again object, and then array. So again, this means that we are expecting an array of objects. Then this here is the name of the parameter. And then here, after that, we can also write a short description. So the data to be rendered. For example, a recipe. Okay. Then we have render here as well. And so here again, we can define its type. And this one is a Boolean. Now, this parameter is actually optional, and so we can put that here inside of these brackets, and we can also specify then here the default value like this. So another description here. So if false, create markup string instead of rendering to the DOM. Now, you might ask, what is the big advantage of this? And of course, the most obvious one is that if you're working with someone else on your project, they can now more easily understand what exactly your function is doing. Because this standard way of writing it, everyone understands, or at least everyone that is familiar with this JSDoc format. Because if everyone describes their function in the same way using the standard, then that becomes really easy for everyone to understand the documentation of each other. Now, what's also great about this is that JavaScript, or actually VS Code, takes this data, and then when we hover over the function, it will take that data and give us this nice overview of the function. So here you can see that the parameter is data, and then with the description, and here the same, also the description for render. Here we can also see that the render is optional, so we have this question mark, and it should be a Boolean. Okay? And then for the data, we can also see that it receives any or an array of any type. And the same happens when we take a look at that in some other file. So it looks a little bit different, but the main information is still here. Okay? But we can add more than just the description of these parameters. For example, we can also write or describe what this function returns. And so usually it doesn't return anything. And so that's then undefined, but it might also be a string. And so that's in case that render here is set to false, right? So let's write that here. Is returned if render is false. Next, we can also define the this keyword. So I think this is another interesting one. And so here the this keyword points to the view object itself. So let's just write view object. So let's see what happens then. Oh, and here object is basically the description. So here it expects the type basically. So let's actually put here that it is an object. And so then here we can say that it's a view, let's say instance. All right, so that makes more sense. And here you already can see that the function is going to return either undefined or a string. So let's try another one. And you see there are a lot of different options. And again, you can check them out in the website that I just showed you. But another one that I like is the author. And so here you can put your own name. And just to finish, there is another one called to do. And so here we can specify everything that we still need to do. Let's just say finish the implementation. And so again, when we come here, it then contains all of this data, and the same when we see it here. All right. And so in your own projects, you can go ahead and add maybe not all of this, but at least part to some of your functions, like at least the most important ones, so that when you come back to them in like 1 or 5 years or so, that you then still know what exactly they do and what data they get in and what they output. All right, and that's it for this project. Now here in package.json, remember we also have this build command. So basically to actually build the final project files, like with compression and tree shaking and all of that, before we then deploy it to a server. But we will actually do that in the next section. And so for now, let's leave it like this and really call this application finished now. However, before we go, once again, I have a couple of ideas for features and improvements that you can implement in this application. So let's start with some easy changes and then all the way to really complex feature additions. So to start, you could display the number of pages between the two pagination buttons. And so with that, the user would then immediately know how many pages there are, which is a little bit more user-friendly. Also about the search results, you could add the ability for the user to sort the search results by the duration or by the number of ingredients of the found recipes. However, that data is actually not available on the search results, unless I do some changes to the API, I guess. So maybe I might do that so that you can actually implement this idea here. Otherwise, you would have to basically get this information for all of the recipes in the search results, but that would require quite a lot of work and also a lot of API calls. Next, another thing that you could do is to perform the validation of ingredients right in the view, so before actually submitting the form. So for example, while the user is inputting the ingredients, you could warn them ahead of time that, for example, the format is wrong. And so that would then, again, be a little bit more user-friendly. Also, maybe alternatively, you could actually improve the input of the ingredients. So instead of having the quantity, unit, and description all in one field, you could add a different field for these 3 data points and then read all that data into your application. And besides that, you could also allow for more than 6 ingredients. So there's a lot to improve, I guess, here in the add recipe functionality. But of course, here in the videos, I had to keep it kind of simple in order not to make like a 20-hour project. Okay, so these are some of the more simpler improvements you can make. And now let's talk about 4 additional features that could be implemented in this application. And the first one would be a shopping list feature. So somewhere on each recipe, you could have a button which would then add all the ingredients of that recipe to some kind of list. And so you could then display that list on the user interface, for example, in another hidden panel in the menu bar, besides the bookmarks, for example. And so that list would then contain all of the ingredients that you might add from different recipes. And actually, the original version of Forkify that I had in my previous course had this functionality. But in this version 2, I had to remove that feature in order to make place for the add recipe functionality, which is new and which I think is way more important. Now, the next feature that you can try to implement is a weekly meal planning feature. So you can make this as crazy as you would like, but in the easiest form, you would simply assign recipes to the next 7 days and then show them somewhere on a weekly calendar. And for this one, you could add like a drop-down menu to each of the recipes, and from there choose which of the next 7 days you want to assign that recipe to. And then in the menu bar, you could again have like a panel which shows the next 7 days, and then which of the recipes was assigned to each day. But of course, you could make it also a lot more complex. This is just the first simple implementation that comes to my mind. And now finally, so actually I only have 3 features for you, not 4. And this last one is the most complex one, and it is to get nutrition data for each ingredient of a certain recipe from a special food API. And the best API for food that I know is the Spoonacular API. So you could check out their website and their documentation, and from there, for each of the ingredients, for example, get the calories. And then you could calculate the total calories of one recipe and maybe also per serving. And there is a lot of other different and interesting stuff that you could do with this application together with the Spoonacular API. So the possibilities are endless here if you want to have some fun. All right? So these are just some of my suggestions, but I'm sure that you can come up with even more. So I've seen really creative stuff from students of this course in other projects. And hopefully you can come up with some of your own as well. And with this, we now actually reach the end of this biggest project of this course. And I hope that you had as much fun building it as I had while going through this together with you. And this is really a great, great achievement. Really well done. Congratulations. So even if you just coded along with me, you still learned a tremendous amount of skills throughout this project. And of course, throughout the entire last like 50 or 60 hours of course videos. And now I would really love to see your implementation of at least a couple of these challenges that I just showed you here, because I think that they will be really beneficial for your own learning. And so maybe you can take some hours when you have the time and really continue practicing your skills here. And if you do that, then please make sure to share some of your screenshots of the implementations that you do on Twitter. So I really would love to see that. But anyway, it's actually not time to say goodbye to this project yet, because in the next section, we will deploy this project onto a live server so that you can then share it with the world and like with everyone that you know. So there is still a lot of interesting stuff to learn. So when you're ready implementing these challenges, then let's go to the next section.